Is it possible to find your book of the year in July? Because I think I'm there. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I'm going to take you through the books that I have read in July, but sadly I'm not talking about all of them. There are a couple of books that I read to finish off my summer TBR, so those I will cover in another video, but let's talk about the books that I just mood read in July. We'll start off with the first book that I read this month, and that was Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall. I had this series on my radar, on my shelf for ages, and I finally picked it up towards the end of June. It was Pride Month. It felt like the perfect time to get it read, but I didn't finish it in June. So I carried it over to July. I picked up the audiobook while I was working. I read the physical copy while I was in the evening, and I really enjoyed this. It was the third book of Alexis Hall's I'd read. I had already read Rosalind Palmer Takes a Cake and Paris Davenport is About to Crumble, and it really went in a U for me because I loved Rosalind Palmer so much. There were a couple of issues that I had with Paris Davenport, and then we went right back up there with Boyfriend Material. This book is about Luc, who is the son of a famous rock star and a French movie star. He is working for a charity that raises money for the awareness of dung beetles, which is probably the funniest thing I've ever heard. But you would be surprised the cases that people will be willing to take on. And one night, Luc is out, he is at a party, and he accidentally trips and falls into a gutter while he's on his way home. And it's completely innocent, nothing has happened. But the tabloids are spinning it. The tabloids are making it seem like there's this big drug-fueled orgy he has just stumbled out of. In order to clean up his material and to bring back the reputation of the charity that he's working for, Luc is set up by a co-worker to date one of the co-worker's friends, Oliver, which is going to kind of clean up his image. Oliver is your typical good guy. He's never had a black mark against his name. He's got a really solid reputation, and it feels like this is the perfect thing that's going to calm Luc's reputation down a little bit. I really loved the relationship between Oliver and Luc. Naturally, as fake dating progresses throughout the book, you do start to see the feelings become a lot more real. You start to see things become a lot more real for both of them. And there's a particular scene that I really enjoyed. It was Luc in the middle of an anxiety attack, possibly a panic attack, and he'd locked himself into his bathroom, back against the door, kind of heavy breathing, world falling on top of his shoulders, and feeling like he didn't mean anything to his friends, he didn't mean anything to Oliver, that his life was going in a completely different direction he wanted it to. And Oliver stayed at the other side of the door, calmed him down, talked him through it, and was so gentle with him and so respectful of him. It genuinely moved me. It made me feel so secure in their relationship. It made me feel so comforted by these two characters, and it was written so wonderfully. As somebody who suffers from anxiety quite a lot as well, it was so great to see that representation in a book and to see it done well. Something else that I also thought was done well is how British this book is. It is naturally written by a British author and it's set in Britain, so you would think that it's going to be quite heavy in its themes there. And it wasn't very kind of alienating for me because I'm really familiar with that. Having grown up in Ireland and most of our media being influenced by the UK, we are familiar with UK slang, UK foods, UK terms, and I knew that quite a lot of the slagging that Luc was getting from his friends, for example, was their kind of terms of endearment for him. Whereas for somebody who's not used to that kind of way of showing affection to friends, it might feel a little bit slightly bullying, or it might feel a little bit different to how I think it was portrayed. But overall, I really thought that was done well, especially the friendship group that Luc had and the friendship group that Oliver had, and the kind of contrast between those two groups. I feel like Luc's friendship group was very kind of zany, out there, eclectic, lively, whereas Oliver's friendship group felt a little bit more reserved, held back, a little bit more mature in some ways, but they fit together perfect. I did, however, feel it a little bit weird that there was a slight crossover between those friendship groups. And it did seem like Luc and Oliver had never crossed paths before. They had a mutual friend, not just the friend that Luc works with, but somebody who's in Luc's very tight friendship group. And I felt like there would have been other opportunities where they would have crossed over, like birthday parties, like engagement parties, or something like that, that they would have naturally just seen each other in the background even. One of my favourite characters, though, wasn't Luc, wasn't Oliver. It was one of Luc's co-workers. I think it was Alex. It might have been one of the others, but he was Welsh. And I swear to God, every single joke that Luc had made, and there were loads of them, there were so many jokes kind of dotted throughout this book, Every single one just went straight over this guy's head. It was almost like he was Drax from Guardians in the Galaxy. He would find plot holes in every single joke, or he would try and associate it with his life but couldn't find a way to like associate himself with it. I thought it was so funny. It was so well done because we all know somebody like that, coworker or not. We all know somebody like that who we have to walk through the joke every single time we're telling one. And it was so relatable. It was so funny. I just thought it was portrayed so well. Something else that I thought was portrayed well was the kind of tumultuous and frosty relationship that Luke has with his father. It's a lot of the driving force of this book, particularly something that happens quite towards the start of this book. And a revelation comes towards the end of the book that really does throw everything up on its head. And I would not be surprised if, going into husband material, the relationship has soured even further. Maybe even to the point of low contact or no contact. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to get to husband material anytime soon. It's not a huge priority. It is one that I'm going to read. But if I do get to it, I wouldn't be surprised if his dad is just mentioned in a flyaway comment of, I'm pretty sure he's doing okay, we don't keep in touch. I would be really surprised if they're still on quite good speaking terms. Like I said, overall, I think this was a stronger book from Alexis Hall than the previous one that I had read from him, and I gave this one a pretty happy 4 stars. Next up was Tell Me Everything by Laura Kay, and I buddy read this with my friend Sam from Griff Reads, and I had the best time checking in with her, asking how far in the book that she was. Maybe she was a bit further ahead from me most of the time because I spent a little bit more time on the book than she did, but I had a really great time with this one as well. This is about Natalie, who is a therapist and is working through her own stuff at the moment. She's going through a breakup with her ex-girlfriend and they are still living together. However, at the start of the book, Natalie has started to move out as Georgia is moving in her new partner, and everything starts to turn around from there. Natalie instead moves in with her friend Poppy and Poppy's boyfriend Felix, and I feel like these two people are the embodiment of the Made in Chelsea group that you would know from that TV show. They're very kind of living in their own bubble. Things just magically appear in front of them, living on a champagne lifestyle, maybe on a champagne budget. And I didn't associate with them at all. I couldn't find anything in them that I really enjoyed reading. There were a couple of things towards the end of the book that really warmed me to them, especially to Poppy, as I felt like she was dealt a different card at the start of the book than she was at the end, and she went through quite a lot of growth. But for the majority of the book, myself and Sam kind of found ourselves asking if we were genuinely supposed to like these people. Natalie is a therapist, as I said, and while she's giving a kind of how to be a therapist group talk, somebody comes to the group named Margot, and Natalie and Margot start a kind of a friendship and a relationship with each other, and I genuinely don't think I enjoyed that. I felt like it was a little bit doctor-patient situation that I didn't love. And I also didn't love how the relationship ended. They don't end up together at the end of the book. And I don't love the reason why. It's something that I've spoken about a couple of times, but a cheating narrative is not something that I enjoy. And this was present here. And that was a little bit of a turn off for the book for me. There were a couple of other things that I didn't really gel with this book, but one of the main things that I didn't love was the length. Overall, I feel like the book was a little bit too long. It could have easily been about 150 pages shorter, gotten in everything that we needed to get, and had much more of an impact on me than it actually had. Something else that really dragged it for me was the length of the chapters. Sam and I would say, let's check in after 3 chapters, let's check in after 4 chapters. And I felt like each chapter was getting longer and longer. And I was watching the end of my Kindle screen. And at one time, I think it said 1 hour and 9 minutes left in a chapter. And I just remember thinking, this is far too long for a chapter to be. I think as my reading pace was a little bit more recognized by my Kindle, that did change over the course of the book. But overall, I feel like the chapter length here was a little bit too long. And sometimes I would lose concentration. Sometimes I would lose ideas of what was happening, who this person was, why we were talking to them, where did they come from. It just alienated me a little bit from the book, and I feel like it needed to be edited down a little bit further to work better. This was my third of Laura Kay's books, and I think it was the one that I enjoyed the least, but overall I did still really enjoy it, and I would still really recommend it. If you're looking for a story about somebody who's trying to get their life back on track after a pretty massive setback, I think this is the story for you. Then we get to what is, as of now, a very strong contender for Book of the Year, and that is The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. I had seen a couple of people in my close circle had read this and loved it. And that gave me a little bit of hope that this is something I would also really enjoy, but I don't think I was prepared for how much I would have enjoyed this book. As you can tell by the title, this book is about Rachel, who is living in Cork City in the years 2009-2010. And you also jump forward to Rachel's life in present day. She's living in London, she's pregnant with her first child, and you find out what happened to her in the time that she was living in Cork back in 2009-2010. She is told in the present day that her professor had gone through a stroke and that his life was a little bit in the balance at the moment. And back in 2009, you find out just how much of an impact he had had on her life. I went into this book thinking that the impact he had had on her life was something completely different to how it had actually been. And I was spellbound by how different this book turned out to be than how it was. I absolutely was gripped by this. I spent so many evenings on my couch blocking out the world. I didn't even put a sprint timer on in the background. I just wanted to escape into this book. I don't want to give too much of a spoiler away as to what happens in this book, but it does touch on quite a lot of really important points in this book, such as abortion, such as subterfuge, infidelity, being in the closet, being out of the closet, and how much that can impact and affect your mental health. It also, as it's set in 2009, is set in quite a tumultuous time for Ireland financially, where quite a lot of families who had previously been quite well-to-do, such as Rachel's, where both of her parents work in dentistry, are now faced with a little bit more financial turmoil, where they don't know if they're going to be able to afford that holiday that they always have in the summer, or where their kids are getting 6 really big Christmas presents, it might be dropped down to maybe 4 smaller ones. I have a kind of close connection with Cork. It's the biggest city that's near to my house. I go there quite a lot. Every time I go home to my parents, we go to Cork shopping for a day. So it was really interesting to see these characters walking down Grand Parade, or studying in UCC, or going to St. Finbarr's Cathedral. Places that I know, places that I am familiar with, that I would have walked myself. I didn't go to college in UCC, I went to college in Dublin. So it was a slightly different experience for me there. But the student lifestyle and the student experience of having a part-time job, and that being in slight turmoil because of the financial downturn Ireland was going through, and shifts being cut and money being cut, it's something that every single person is going to relate to, whether or not you grew up in Cork. This is the third of Caroline's books that I have read, and I have genuinely been blown away by every single one that I've read. So I think Caroline has definitely earned the title of author for me. Her other 2 books are also set in Ireland in different areas around the place, and I just love her writing style. It's so immersive, it's so gripping, and it's also pretty heartbreaking at times. It's quite funny at times. She has this fantastic storytelling vibe to her that I just know I'm going to be in safe hands whatever book she puts put out. Just in case you couldn't tell by that completely glowing review, this book was almost an instant 5 stars from the minute I picked it up. After that, I went for a completely different vibe, and I read Your Dad Will Do by Katie Robert. This story is a hardcore erotica, May-December romance, forbidden romance story between Lily and Shane. Shane is the father of Lily's ex-boyfriend, who she has just caught cheating on her, and to get her revenge, she goes straight to his dad's house and ends up sleeping with him. They end up spending an entire weekend together, where I think they left the bedroom maybe twice to go and get food, or they needed to go and pick something up from a shop somewhere. I really enjoyed this. It is completely different to the other books that I have read previously. It was a lot steamier than any other book that I've read. It was a lot more explicit, but I really enjoyed most of it until we got to the end. The ending went in a direction that I think I didn't want it to go. I would have preferred that this had stayed at that weekend, and then when there was discussions of it going a little bit further, I think I was just a bit turned off from the outcome of this book. But overall, I had a really good time with this book. It's quite short. I think the audiobook was about 2 hours on 2 times speed, and it was a really interesting listen to get me through the day. So on to the final book that I'm going to talk about in this video, and that is Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pierce. This is a follow-up to Dear Mrs. Bird, and like Dear Mrs. Bird, is set in London in the 1940s during World War II, during the Blitz, during that kind of emergency rationing period that they had then. This book follows Emmy, who had previously been the secretary to Mrs. Bird, a columnist for the Women's Friend magazine, but now Mrs. Bird has moved on. Emmy has a little bit more responsibility in the magazine, she has a little bit more of an important role in the magazine, and has been sent out to talk to women who have been left behind as their partners, husbands, brothers, fathers, anything like that, have gone off to fight the war. While Emmy and her friend Bertie are out on this assignment, they meet with a plethora of women who have all been affected by the war in different ways. One woman, her husband has gone missing, has been declared missing for a couple of days, and they have no idea when, if, or how he's going to come back. Another woman has been left behind with a young family, is struggling to bring them up, is working in a part-time job to try and keep money into the house, keep food on the table, but the balancing act is starting to kind of tip in the one direction she doesn't want it to tip into. I really loved this. It felt really authentic to what women were going through at the time. I know that there were quite a lot of women who felt left behind when their husbands had gone off to war and kind of had to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and say, okay, we're left behind to kind of run the country. How are we going to do so? Aside from all of the work things that Emmy has going on, there is also a really lovely proposal, engagement, and wedding story in this book. And particularly with what happens to Birdie at the end of the last book, I really enjoyed how on board and how involved she was with the wedding that was coming up. It was so wonderful to see it, but also it was really nice to see what enjoyment and what fun in life people could have brought in those times, especially because money was scarce, food was getting scarce, morale was at a time low. It was really nice to just see people look forward to a wedding, getting excited about it, planning it out. It was a little bit of a break from all the dullness. Like with Boyfriend Material, I read this in a kind of tandem way that while I was at work at my desk, I would listen to the audiobook, and while I was off work, I would read this as the hard copy I have here. And Anna Popplewell, who played Susan in the Chronicles of Narnia film series, did the audio narration for this, and she was phenomenal. I don't think they could have picked a better narrator for this. Her voice, her accent was just perfect to the time period that this book was set in, but also she captured the slang that people would have used, the language that people would have used. I think she was so authentic in her descriptions of this book, in her narration, in the characterization that she gave to it. I think listening to it was a much more enjoyable experience than actually reading it, to the point that I listened to it much more than I had read it. I was really excited to get to this book, and I am a little bit sorry that I put it off for so long, but now that I've got it finished, I have got one more book in the series that I am going to get to. I think it's called Mrs. Bird Calling, and I am definitely going to get to that before the end of this year. Those are some of the books that I had read in July, and there is a couple more that you're going to find out about in the next couple of days. Have you read any of those, or have I piqued your interest to read any of them? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the balloon emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.